This is the Teaching and Learning podcast from the Centre for Teaching, Learning and Innovation at Lethbridge College in Southern Alberta, Canada. Located on the traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, it is the intent of our college community to honour the land from a place of connection and provide an avenue for us all to come together in a holistic way to share stories and learn from each other. Tune in, hit play, and get inspired as guests share their stories and ideas on the dynamic, ever-changing landscape of education, teaching, and learning. Today, we are having a panel discussion with some special guests from Australia and our leaders from the Centre for Teaching, Learning and Innovation at Lethbridge College. Our guests are from the Australian College of the Arts, also known as Collarts. And what I will do is start by getting each of you to introduce yourselves and what your role is. So maybe Tim, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Donna. So hi, everybody. Tim Moss. I'm the Dean at Collarts, so responsible for overall academic leadership. Okay,
and Ben?
Hi, Donna and everyone. My name's Ben O'Hara. I'm the Managing Director at Collarts. So I guess responsible for everything that goes on in the four walls at Collarts. So everything that Tim's not busy doing.
Great, thank you. And I'll also have each of our Lethbridge College leaders introduce themselves. So Jackie, if you'd like to go first.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jacqueline Doherty. I'm the Dean for the Centre for Teaching, Learning and Innovation here at Lethbridge College.
Okay, and Erin?
Hi, I'm Erin Howard, and I'm the Associate Dean for CTLI.
And last but not least, Kyle?
Kyle Snowden, Senior Manager of Library and Digital Learning at Lethbridge College.
Okay, well, thank you very much and welcome to everyone. This is really exciting to bring you all together to have this discussion. I understand that Lethbridge College and Collarts have a relationship and a connection, but I'm not sure how that originated. So can you talk a little bit about how that came to be?
I guess it's not an uncommon story really, but Erin and I met at a conference a few years ago. And we found we had some like-minded ideas around teaching and learning, and it was a teaching and learning based conference. So it was the hot topic of discussion across a few days. And to be honest, I was really impressed with some of the things that Lethbridge College was doing just in the conversations I was having with Erin. And we're a much smaller college, but on a very rapid growth trajectory. So in a very almost selfish way, to be honest, Donna, I sort of jumped on board to try to learn as much about the structure and setup and what was happening at Lethbridge College so that we could replicate some of that in our growth at Collarts.
Thanks, Ben. And Tim, how did you become involved in this connection?
That's a really good question, Donna, and I think it's purely by nature of at Collarts, we work very closely together. So there wouldn't be a day, I don't think, where Ben and I aren't, brainstorming and asking each other tough questions and trying to figure out how we're going to move forward with various things. And I think more than once, Ben's answer was, I'm just going to message Erin. We'll just see what Erin has to say about that. We'll see if Erin's got any resources. And then over time, that gradually expanded to just going to talk to Lethbridge, and we'll just see if Lethbridge have any ideas or thoughts about that. And so I think it's just kind of organically grown. And then Ben and Erin were kind enough to invite me along to one of their meetings. And I think it's sort of just grown from there. And we've certainly taken a lot from that connection in terms of helping us figure out, how we get it up to be a little bit more Lethbridge-like, I guess.
Oh, that's really interesting. And Erin, do you want to talk about what that looks like from the Lethbridge College side?
Yeah, they're making it sound like we gave them so much, but I think we have learned a lot from them as well. Ben was nice enough to send a big box of Collarts swag our way a couple of years back. So I think our offices have some water bottles and some notepads and stuff like that from Collarts. And I was just really impressed with how innovative and cutting edge. Yeah, there's Jackie. Exactly. We were just really impressed with how innovative and cutting edge both their programming and just kind of the vibe of the college as well. And anytime we had projects going here, I would check in with Ben and say, hey, have you done something similar? And we were swapping ideas and some documents. And then they were really starting to build their teaching and learning center. And that's when I thought, let's bring a group together and start to have these conversations. And they've been really great. Hence us thinking maybe it would be good to do a podcast together. But yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Jackie and Kyle, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that anytime we have an opportunity to reflect on some of the work that we're doing through these kinds of conversations is always really good. And like Erin said, we have learned so much from some of our discussions, and it's actually really fun to see how energetic all of us get. And you're keeping us under control today, but I think we hit it off right away the moment that Erin introduced us to these two. So I'm really grateful for it.
Kyle?
For me, it was a package arrived at the office with some of the best branded swag I've ever seen. And so obviously I was drawn to that. And Erin set me up with a very nice t-shirt. That's one of my favorite t-shirts to wear that says Collarts across the back. And who are these people? And then the questions started rolling in, and next thing you know, like I think we meet every month or 2 months and just have these rich conversations. So it's great to hear from Erin and Ben how just a chance meeting at a conference showing the same interests is now kind of really affecting us and trickling down to our students at our institutions.
Well, it sounds like it's been a really mutually beneficial connection to have. So how do your centers support educational innovation at your institutions? And Ben, I'll maybe let you hop in first on this one.
Yeah, that's a deep question to get us rolling, which I really like. We're a very, very different educational institution at Collarts from most. We are creative industries focused, and all of our courses are in that field. Our teachers tend to be, I use the term a little bit carefully, but that pracademic type of teacher. So, I think there's a lot of sort of innovation and activity that happens day to day. Part of our job, Tim and I, is just to capture and enhance that activity that's happening anyway. And I'm sure we'll get to it later on. But through the COVID pandemic, that innovation has come up, 10 times, 100 times, and it's almost a case of things happen so fast that we have to stay on top of having some idea of what's going on across even a small college. So I can only imagine for Lethbridge it's going to be even more the case. Lethbridge College is, I think, about 4,000 students, and we're about 1,200 students. So we're about a quarter of the size. But that gives us a unique advantage too, because there's a whole bunch of that great stuff going on in the four walls. We can build it knowing that there's a destination in sight, so we know where we're heading by using, someone like Lethbridge is a really good example of where we're heading at. When we get to 4,000 students, we know the kind of structures and capture the things on the way through. I'm not sure that answered your question very well, but I think Tim might have something to add to that.
Tim.
Yeah, thanks. I thought that was a good answer, Ben. I mean, I just wanted to pick up on one thing you said, because I think this is really critical to how we work. And I think in a sense, our structure is slightly different. As Ben said, we're about a quarter of the size of Lethbridge. We don't really have a distinct centre as such. It's just we are the academic leaders of the college, and so that's just what we do. We don't have enough people to kind of carve out distinct centres yet. We will. So I think my sense about the role we play with innovation is often, and we when I started, Ben said to me, and he said this the other day to someone else who started, and I thought it was a really good way of explaining a bit about the Collarts ethos, which is that whatever your role is at Collarts, we want you to be a leader in that role. So we don't want to be the ones telling you what to do, how to do your job. We want you to be telling us what you need to do, but also how we need to support you. And so I think what we've tried to do is really empower our teachers, our courses, the heads of those courses, to really take that course and make the most of it. But then what we end up doing is almost like conducting. So if we see something great happening over in music and we think that, you know, audio could really benefit from that, or comedy might find that idea really useful, we kind of orchestrate those connections. So a lot of what we're doing is identifying those pockets of innovation when they start to pop up and going, that's one we can take to everybody, or oh, that one would be interesting to just these people. And I think that's a kind of a full-time role in some ways, just keeping an eye on that field and how things are starting to grow and develop. And so we kind of orchestrate those connections, but we're lucky that we've got such a dynamic and motivated team who will do the thinking, you know, and we just have to find it and share it often.
Thanks, Tim. Jackie or Aaron or Kyle, I know you're all probably wanting to jump in there. So who would like to go first?
I can step in. Yeah, I just love how you put that, just in terms of, you know, being the orchestrators of making those connections. We feel that as well with our role here being centralized, knowing what's happening with all the different academic centers and all the different units. We get to work with all of them. And oftentimes it's about bridging those areas together. But it's also about looking out there beyond our walls. So sometimes some of the things that trigger some of those really great ideas and those innovations, or even trying to predict where we need to be down the road, comes from things that have nothing to do really right now with higher education, but they will absolutely influence where we need to be. And so I think that with our team, it's about creating space for members of our teams to constantly be looking out there, getting inspired out there, and then bringing it back in here to try and test things out. And the institution isn't always ready for that, but we have to be that much further ahead so that we can, yes, meet them where they're at right now, but also be ready for them when they get to where they need to be down the road. So I think that that's a really exciting position to be, and it just keeps things going all the time. Nothing will ever stay the same in our world. And I think most people in our centers are quite comfortable with that. And when they're not, I think that they're realizing that the team is there to catch them and lift them up when they might be a little bit uncertain about certain things. So.
Yeah, it just comes back to that culture. Like Jackie said, creating space. And like Tim said, finding those little bits of culture and trying to lift them up. And I think just, trying to instill that confidence for some risk and that confidence to kind of learn and try things out. And that's the unique position that we're in, to be able to inspire some of that innovation.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, and along that lines, as Aaron talking, got me thinking, you know, we had someone come to our college once who, you know, was giving a kind of a lecture on all these great things happening in higher education. I remember going to them and kind of saying, like, how is this happening at all these institutions? How does it start? And they gave me this advice that kind of sticks with me now. Everything's a pilot. Everything's a pilot, everything's a trial, everything. And if you approach it with that mindset, then it actually it cushions any sort of, you know, failure that you might have, because we're just trying something out, and we're piloting it now, and maybe it's great. But no matter what, we're going to along the way find, you know, a different way to do it, or a better way to do it, or maybe maybe we chose the poor way to do it, but you know what, we covered ourselves because it's just a pilot. And that kind of sticks with me in most things we do to support, you know, faculty and students in the kind of the realm of innovation. And as a teaching and learning center, we're kind of, you know, where Tim's talked about having you know, they know what's going on and they're connecting their faculty. We're just doing that at our institution on just maybe a larger scale, that programs might be doing something similar, but not be aware of each other just because the size of the institution and the silos, where we're the silo smashers, and we go in and we know what's going on in the different areas, and then we can connect instructors who, you know, might only know each other from passing in the hallways, and then great things can happen.
Oh, that's some great ideas there, Kyle. And so it really, as I mentioned before, it sounds like a really mutually beneficial relationship. Both organizations have learned a lot from each other. And we are going to talk a little bit later about things specific to the pandemic and COVID. But up to that and prior to that, what are some things that you can talk about that each of you have learned from the other, or your organization has learned from the other institution? And Tim and Ben, again, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really obvious one for us, which is we are really building our Centre for Teaching and Learning from the ground up. I guess a year ago we had one staff member in that centre. That was it. We had a associate dean teaching and learning, and we've now we kind of might have a little bit borrowed a structure from another institution. And we kind of might have borrowed a few of those titles and, the way that the org chart's set up and things like that. And we're still in the infancy of that, in all honesty. But because we've been so impressed and amazed, really, at the goals that Lethbridge College has been able to kick. Is that a term there? Is that a kicking goals? Is that a thing that you guys say as a?
It's a good thing. You want to be kicking goals. That's good.
You want to be kicking goals, yeah. Anyway, because you're kicking goals over there, punching above your weight might be another better phrase for it. Okay, Kyle's nodding at that one, so that makes sense. Because of that, it makes a lot of sense for us to say, well, wouldn't we model something on, or want to model ourselves on someone who's been super successful in doing it and having achieved a lot and, putting out great outputs. And I guess that goes right back to those, those initial documents and resources that Erin and I were sharing. I think right back to, it wasn't long into your tenure at Collarts, Tim, you'd only just started, and Tim was doing a PD session for all staff, and Erin, we didn't have any resource on a particular topic. I can't remember what it was, and Erin said, "Oh no, use this," and it was a great resource. And it was like, well, why wouldn't you want to model yourself on someone who's able to provide these great resources and give us what we were after straight away, So yeah, that immediately springs to mind is that we are modelling ourselves after Lethbridge College, which is great fun,
Jim, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
The resource was around group work and getting students collaborating. I remember, and thanks, Erin. It was a great resource. I think what I would add to that is, and I think Ben's really covered this off, but I just want to highlight that this is the really significant thing for us, that it wasn't, we didn't just photocopy your org chart, although we might have done that. But, it was also about really understanding the relationships that you build with your faculty and looking at how that is something we could also bring in when we started bringing in a centre. I mean, I've worked in centres for teaching and learning and innovation in other places, and it's, it doesn't always work that way. It's often less of a dialogue and more of a monologue, where these centres are, producing a resource and sending it out. And it's like, right, well, that's my work done. And we got a real sense that wasn't the way it operated at Lethbridge. And that was what we were interested in as well, is finding that way to really make professional development and teaching and learning more of a conversation with our teachers, make it something that, was involving them and we were helping them. But again, that focus on them building up their own ideas and their own practice. So we liked that too. And we thought if that's the structure that lets you scale up that approach, then that was really the appeal for us, I think.
And coming back over to the Lethbridge College side, maybe Jackie, I'll let you go first. And so what has that looked like from our side, from the Lethbridge College side?
It's funny because we as much as you say that you're modeling a lot of what you're doing after what we're doing, we are a well-established center. We've been around for a long time, but we've gone through some really rapid transition in the last couple of years. So it's fairly new to us as well. I mean, working together with all of our departments is when, as closely as we are right now, is something that we're learning, and we're iterating through that process. And so I think it's kind of interesting to watch how you're pulling your center together, and how we can talk about some of the things that are working and some of the things that might not be working, but we're still on that learning curve. We're still trying to figure a lot of that out. So I think that there's just a lot of reflection in our conversations as well. I know that with COVID, and I know you're going to talk about that later, but I think that that's been a real learning experience for us to see how you've adapted and how you've worked through that process, but also how you've grown so much in the last couple of years. It's just so impressive to be able to take. It's almost like to plant the seed for what you've established, and to grow it as fast as you have. I think that that's the dream of so many institutions. So it's pretty inspiring to see how you've done that. So I think you need to take a lot of the credit for that as well.
I just remember when we were talking about the different positions, coming back to reflection, they were saying, well, how does this team work with this team? And why is that title that? Why learning experience designer? Is that different from instructional designer? Do your ed developers, are they on the same team as your learning experience designers? So I think by going through and just kind of sharing with Ben and Tim what kind of decisions we had made around the structure of our center, we learned that, what maybe was arbitrary or what we walked into, but what was really intentional as well. So I think what Jackie said about we're always restructuring things, we're always, like Kyle said, like the switchboard, we're plugging one thing into the next and seeing how things move around. And I think we'll continue to do that. But working with you two really helped us take a deeper look at why we have structured things the way that we did. And, some of it was pre-existing as well. So it's a good second check.
Yeah, and building on that, it's I think when we first started talking with Ben and Tim, I think the three of us got a little kind of jealous and excited because as being kind of educator nerds or edu nerds, in our heads we're thinking, oh, imagine you could build an institution from the ground up. What would you do, right? And so we love the idea and hear the ideas that you're coming up with and hearing about them, but we're really trying to all do the same thing too. We just are in different situations, and I imagine there's a lot of difficulties starting from scratch. And we also have the difficulties of our institution comes with the history. I think it was 1957 we were established, so there's a lot of history there. So moving and pivoting can be a little tricky at times. We're both going to this. We're both aiming for the same target. We just have these different situations that we're coming from. So it's been so much fun to bounce ideas off each other.
Thanks, Kyle. It sounds like an amazing experience on both sides, the learning that has happened and the growth in both organizations. The last year has been a challenge for many post-secondary institutions with the pandemic and with COVID, and has certainly been a time of all kinds of transitions. And so now we're at July 7th, 2021. Well, at least we are here. Maybe you guys are July 8th there.
With July 8th, that's right.
Okay. So July 8th in Australia, 2021, and another period of transition is coming up or maybe has already occurred. What mode of delivery and what does it look like at your institution with the moving in and out of the pandemic? What is the current status of things at your institution?
Australia's had a very different COVID experience than most of the world. We've had very few cases, but very extreme lockdown measures. So we're going into our second winter now, and we definitely to have a lot more freedoms and activities happening in the summers. So, you know, and I know you guys are coming out of lockdown now or restrictions. I wonder what your winter's going to be like coming up, if it's going to, you know, vaccines will put us in a different position. I don't want to start sitting here talking about like I'm some sort of, you know, COVID or vaccine expert, but you know, we've really bounced around is the short answer. We've gone from, you know, one of the most extreme lockdowns in the world, which lasted, you know, 100 and something days, to, you know, virtual freedom, to back into short-term lockdowns from anywhere from, I think we did one that was 5 days, Tim, and we've only just come out of another one which was 3 weeks, and then the varying levels. So what we've found is, we've just had it come out of our 4th lockdown, and we've got a COVID sort of crisis group that meets once a week. And when that announcement came that we were going into that 4th lockdown, I remember at that group saying, okay, so everyone knows what to do. Let's just do it. You know, we are pretty well rehearsed at how to react and what we need to do to move everything to online learning in a short period of time. The communications that need to go out to students, to staff, you know, the whole range of things. So from our marketing teams to our academic teams to our teaching and learning teams, everybody's really kind of firing now on it's unfortunate, but really firing on what to do. The harder part, I think, is the gradual return each time. As restrictions lift, there are different kinds of restrictions each time, and you can do this, but you can't do that. So it's coming out is never as quick and instant, and in some ways as easy as going in. There's a lot more uncertainty each time we come out. So I think, you know, for people listening, you know, over there in the Northern Hemisphere, the lesson for us has definitely been that potentially, at least until the vaccination numbers are big enough, and I know that Canada's doing super well on that, so, you know, maybe that's just around the corner for you. But for us, it's at least another 6 to 8 months of learning to live with short-term temporary lockdowns, and this sort of bouncing around and learning to live with uncertainty. So what does it look like on campus? Well, for us, it's the essential hands-on type learning things that are back to face-to-face. And probably like most institutions around the world, the old-fashioned lecture style learning is, you know, radically changed. And when it does take place, it's over Zoom and in remote ways, and being supported by all the wonderful technologies that go around with it as well, being as interactive as it can be.
Thanks, Ben. And yes, as we're heading towards September, we're really interested to know what that experience might be like and what you've learned. So that's really great to hear that. Tim, is there anything you want to add to that?
I think it's really interesting. We had our academic governing board yesterday, and we have a student representative council, and the president was on that. And we asked her to tell us a little bit about this year as opposed to last year. And she said, this year is way harder. Last year, it was simple. You knew you were learning from home, and, you know, this is how you did that. This is the tools you needed. This is the equipment you needed. And yeah, it was difficult. And, you know, there was 100 days, as Ben said, where we weren't allowed to leave our house for more than an hour a day, and we weren't allowed to go more than 5 kilometers away from our house. So it was, you know, our worlds became very small, but in some ways for a student studying, that was safe, that was controllable. You know, they sort of knew what to do in that environment. But she said this year, everything's changed and it's much harder to work it out, you know, and we've come out with a lot more options for the students. So as Ben said, they can, in most of our courses, they can do up to 100% of it now online if they want to do that. But it's the if they want to do that part that the students themselves are still figuring out. And a lot of them are landing at that point where they've worked out that these are the things they want to do in person, and it is a lot of the heavily applied, heavily practical or resource intensive sorts of learning. But they've also realized that for a lot of other things, they're perfectly fine, and often I think prefer to do that online when there's a bit more flexibility for them. But arriving at that point, I mean, there's really no there's no way for a student to find what works for them except to try a bunch of different things. And when some of those trials are then affected by a snap lockdown, where the student might suddenly have gone, do you know what, I've made up my mind, I'm definitely going to do that unit on campus, and then sorry, you can't. It's very difficult for them to reconcile all of that. And there's no models for them either. I think that's the other thing. So that's the same for staff, but I think from a student perspective, that's what's been really tough. And we're just trying to guide them through that as best we can and keep communicating with them.
Certainly, it's brought many challenges, but the pandemic has also brought a lot of innovation, particularly to education. What are some of the things that you see staying long-term that you've learned through all of this?
It's actually interesting because they're just coming on campus right now. This has been the 1 week that I've come here pretty much every day, and it's nice to see new faces, but there's also a certain amount of excitement in the air about the potential of where we're going. And so, yeah, you don't forget some of the hardships that we've experienced over the last year, but there has been a lot of growth, and there's a lot of opportunities moving forward in ways that we couldn't get past before. We were almost stuck. We knew that we wanted flexibility, but the structure wasn't in place. But now it is. So, just in terms of like we talk about, flexible, high flex learning opportunities for our students, but we're also talking about that with our staff. And I think that's really important when you're designing an institution around those types of learning models, for everybody to recognize what that actually looks like. So if we're only doing it with part of the institution, so designing classrooms for students, but we're not actually applying that with our systems and structures in our working environments here at the college, we'll never really understand what their needs are. And so I think that that's been really, really helpful. I know that our teams right now are looking at different ways that we can work better together in the space that we have, and how we can look at our student spaces and create more opportunities for them to have more options and, more flexibility in how they learn, where they want to learn. So I think that that's really exciting. And I know that it's not going to be super smooth coming in September. And I think that that's where our role is going to be to work with people and let them know that it's okay. It's okay if it doesn't work right off the bat. We're going to try it out anyway, because we know that there's a lot of potential there. So I always say this, that, our job as leaders within this center isn't to tell people how to do things, but to create conditions for people to, for some of those ideas to start to sprout, and for people to feel comfortable trying something new that they thought might have been somewhat out of their comfort zone before, and it still might be. And I think that that's okay as well, that some people might not be as ready to come, as others are. And I think we have to be flexible with that as well.
Thanks, Jackie. Ben?
We've got an almost unique situation in that we're currently planning and about to start building another new campus. And we're trying to work out what the post-pandemic campus looks like, because we don't think it looks like what the pre-pandemic campus did. And so far we haven't cracked the code yet of exactly what it is, but we know, well, our current rough planning, there's no, old-fashioned classroom in this new building at all. There's nothing that's not a practical hands-on learning space where students are doing stuff. That might just be the first clue, but, I think it's going to be very interesting. It'll take us another, 6 to 12 months to build this thing. But when we get to the end of it, I think it'll be interesting. It'll be our first foray into what does post-pandemic education in a physical environment look like. And I think it will look very different to all of our existing campuses, which have really built on a hundreds of year old model of classrooms and, yes, practical spaces, but it's a model that hasn't really been disrupted for a really long time. So I guess there's budget constraints, and classrooms, are cheap, easy ways to educate lots of students all at once. But I think we can be a bit smarter than that and find, much more interesting and engaging and innovative ways to educate even more students all at once, possibly, hybrid type classrooms or hybrid type, practical learning spaces. So those challenges are yet to be determined, but we're kind of staring down the barrel of them right now.
And I understand Collarts is really undergoing a lot of growth and quite rapid growth. Can you talk about how you've been managing that growth? And because that's in addition to the pandemic and all of what else is going on.
I think, yeah, and we've continued to grow through the pandemic as well at the rates, if not actually a little bit higher than we had been growing in the past, which is not what we were anticipating. How do we handle it? Well, it's sort of, there's lots of running around, screaming fire and running from the building. No, not really. It's all planned for. Like we know that this is where we're heading. We've got a very clear strategic plan, and we understand that growth. But we're also, kind of aware that we can't be too rigid in our thinking, because things are bouncing around a lot. I was actually in a talk just yesterday with a futurist whose name's I forget, but he did a study of futurists and their predictions, and I've actually got the note in front of me. 15% of all the things, so he did a study of futurists over 2 or 3 years. 15% of all the things that they were certain would happen didn't happen at all, and 25% of the things they were certain would never happen happened. They were wrong 40% of the time. So I reckon that's not a bad place to be. Like, if you think you know what's going to happen, you're around probably 40% likely to be wrong. And that's, I think if you approach rapid growth with that sort of concept in mind, that yes, we've got a plan and we know what we're doing and we're going down that road, but we need to just remain flexible and willing to change our views as more evidence or more whatever presents itself. That's probably been helpful to us, is just growing but remaining nimble.
Great, thanks, Ben. So looking at that future change and that future growth, I understand that there's been some discussion about the connection between innovation and grassroots projects. Can you explain that connection and give some examples?
So thinking about any sort of innovation, we want it to be faculty buy-in in our kind of centers for teaching and learning is really key to getting anything accomplished. We could sit around all day and brainstorm the wildest but yet most effective things we can think of to solve all of our problems. But unless someone comes to us with the problem, it's not really going to go anywhere. So we've always tried to give opportunity for faculty to come to our teams and say, this is a roadblock I've encountered in my classroom or in my teaching or in student learning. And then that's where the wheels start going. Okay, well, we can work with you on that. And that's where, us keeping our fingers on the pulse of new teaching strategies, new learning strategies, innovative technologies really pays off. So, and this, going through the COVID pandemic has really put the accelerator to a lot of these innovative practices that maybe we've been aware of for a while, but faculty maybe just haven't been ready to do. And so it's, I've heard it described as the golden age of centers for teaching and learning, and I definitely see it that way, because we were talking about some of these practices, and then all of a sudden people were knocking down our door wanting these solutions, or wanting us to work with them to find solutions to some of these problems. And really what it's modeled, and this ties into some earlier stuff you were asking us about, is we've modeled lifelong learning. We've shown people who are going out in the industries that are rapidly changing that we can change too, and we can adapt to and find some solutions. And so there's been a sort of empathetic tone to all of that as well, as when something doesn't work for the faculty member who's trying to teach the students are okay with that. They understand, you know, why something didn't work, and vice versa as well when the student has an issue as well. So really for us, the grassroots is when someone comes to us and we're ready. And that's where we've been for a while, but in maybe a more accelerated pace in the last year.
Thanks, Kyle. Jackie, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that when we talk about grassroots too, I think that it's about balancing that some of the things that are inherent to higher education. So we know that, I mean, as much as hierarchies sometimes don't sit well with people, we are there is a hierarchy. We report to government. There are certain structures within our organization that lend themselves to that. But there are also a lot of opportunities to create space. I keep saying that, but to create space and create those conditions for some of those ideas to emerge from the bottom up. And it's really important that if any kind of movement is going to happen, that's where it actually starts, because you can't force people to be innovative. You can't tell people we're going to be innovative. You have to be able to create conditions that will allow them to start to think about innovative ideas, to feel safe in trying things that might not work out, to be able to take two ideas and put them together and come into something completely new, and to completely fail at some of them, but know that there's a lot of learning that might come from that, and to know that the system and the structure of our institution is there to support you. I know that when I talked to you before in another podcast, I did talk about that complexity leadership theory, and that's what that really does. Is it takes the balance between those, that agility that needs to exist, the administrative qualities, and then there's that enabling factor in between that takes those both together and helps you wrestle with that tension that happens, and that really is part of what academic institution and higher education is all about. So
I thought that was fantastic what you were saying there, Jackie, about, you really can't force this, and you can't, an innovation is only an innovation if it adds value. Otherwise, it's just an interesting, fancy idea, and so, it's got to be, that value's got to be seen and shared. And I think that's where the grassroots projects often, they're often a better place to start, because people have already found the value. They might just need a bit of help to shape the innovation, and I think there's a real danger otherwise if you think, well, we're the ones who hold all the innovations. You kind of march out there and turn around and find you're standing there on your own. And, someone once said to me about educational innovations, he said, that it's a bit, trying to do an innovation on your own is a bit like trying to clap with one hand. You can do it, but it doesn't make much noise and it's really tiring. So, it's much better to find the projects where the people are, and kind of build on that where they've already found the value, but maybe need a bit more structure. And I think that's a fine sort of balance, and one that we kind of reinvent all the time.
Thanks, Tim. So Ben, you talked about the success of futurists, or maybe not so successful predictions of futurists, but a question for all of you to think about is, what kind of changes do you see ahead in higher education for the future?
I'm going to have a posse of futurists on my back after this. We're in all sorts of trouble. And also, anyone who's listening should know that whatever we say in the next few minutes, you got to ignore at least 40% of it. So the hard part is which 40%, right? So we're in trouble. But I think Jackie should answer this. She's keen.
Well, I think that it's, like I said before, it's always important to look out there to see, how the world's engaging with each other and how the world's interacting with each other, because that's how we predict the future, because that's how they're going to want to engage in here and with us. I often look at my own children. So I have one in middle school and one that's going into high school, and they just both went through this pandemic at their ages. And the first time that they went through it, it was a disaster. They hated it. They hated learning remotely. The second time they went through it, it was actually not so bad. They still preferred the in-face and those interactions. And the third time when I asked them, so what would you prefer? It was absolutely some of both. There were qualities that they were already recognizing that they really they liked being able to kind of control that a little bit more. They liked some of the freedom that they had from working in both environments. And I felt like they really appreciated both environments a lot better. But it also really opened my eyes to how they communicate with the world out there. So, how they communicate with their friends, whether it's, through games, or whether it's through these small texts, or whether it's through, I don't know. I just think there's some important observation that we have to stop and pause and take note of, because that's going to tell us what we need to be doing in here. And when we're trying to build that future, we won't be able to do it unless we pay attention.
Ben?
Yeah, I completely agree with Jackie. And as she was talking, something sprung into my mind, which is really our music course, which I've been talking to our music staff for a long time about what could we manage online and what needed to stay face to face. And not surprisingly, and it's no criticism of them, but pre-pandemic, they were very much of the mindset that you couldn't teach music in an online learning environment, that you needed to be in the same room to do it. Forced into it, they were the most amazing, innovative, incredible group that you've ever seen. And, not so long ago, they came to us going, actually, even if everything goes back to how it was, we want to run this music course as an online course as well as a face-to-face course. And I firmly believe, speaking of punching above your weight, but I think that the Collarts online music course is the best online music course available in the world. And we never would have got there without being having our hand forced. I'm super proud of that team. They've done an incredible job. They've employed the technology in every conceivable way. Our audio department's done the same too. We teach audio engineering. Within weeks of the pandemic, they'd worked out how to pull Zoom apart and have, super high quality audio. We had students operating equipment on campus, but from their bedrooms. So they were mixing bands that were playing in a studio in a different space. They were doing incredible things. So I think that it's almost the perfect timing for this. If this had happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, we wouldn't have seen quite the level of continuity that we've been able to see and the level of innovation. So it's a pandemic of its time in terms of education, because really what it's done is it's forced us all to move 10, 15 years into the future in the space of a year and a half, 2 years. So it's actually been really positive in some really weird ways.
Thanks, Ben. Before we wrap up, I'd like to just open up the mic for any final thoughts that you have, or maybe something that we haven't discussed that you would like to talk about.
I guess what we first started talking about was how beneficial it's been for our institutions to work together. We're in different kind of phases and we have a lot to learn from one another. And so I think that's a big takeaway. I can't wait to see what kind of things we learn from each other in the next year. I think, post-COVID especially, we have started to share a lot of those lessons. And, when we were returning back to campus, they had said, oh, watch for this. Our students wanted to come back and then they kind of went back home. And so I think it's just been really great. And I think we'll continue to work together. But I think there's always value in institutions, even they might be across Canada, the province, across the globe, working together to learn those lessons. You have more in common with one another than you think.
What I would say to build on that, Donna, is I think the relationship we've established here is actually a really nice model of some of the concepts we've been talking about. This is about finding that innovation by working together. And I think that's we all need to do that. There's no models for how you emerge from a global pandemic and what you keep and what you lose, and both from what you were doing before the pandemic and what you developed in it. So I think this collaboration is actually a really good example of how we develop those models, I think, because we're able to really quickly test and explore ideas at an international level. All I keep thinking is, my goodness, we should be publishing this stuff, but, watch this space on that.
Well, it's been wonderful talking with all of you, and it is really amazing how a connection at a conference or just some small connection that you might not realize how it can grow, like this connection that you guys have all formed between the two institutions, Lethbridge College and Collarts. And it's really amazing, this collaboration and the innovation that has occurred. Thank you very much for joining and coming together today to talk about all of the growth that everyone has experienced and the innovation that has occurred.
Thanks for having
Donna.
us. It's been great.
Thanks, Donna.
Yeah,
Thank you.
This episode featured Donna McLaughlin as host and Jacqueline Doherty, Aaron Howard, Tim Moss, Ben O'Hara, and Kyle Snowden as panelists. Jude Bialik was our producer. Ryan Robinson was our sound technician and editor. Thank you also to Daryl Benebeck, Joel Gaudry, Kelsey Jansen, Mike Smith, and Tyler Wall for their ongoing support and expertise. Our podcast is funded by the Lethbridge College's Centre for Teaching, Learning and Innovation and recorded on the traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy. For more information and inspiration, check out learninginnovation.ca.